the Mafia got that event kicked off of their television provider. Not a peep out of the largest mixed martial arts websites in the world.
Joining me today is Todd Atkins, Mike Davis, and Miguel Iturrate to discuss the match 2022, Tenshin Nasukawa versus Takeru Sagawa. Tough names to pronounce. And I want to touch a little bit upon the specifically like the lack of attention it received on this side of the world, especially. And, before we start, we had Todd on the show already. He called in one time. We broke down UFC pay-per-view, so people kind of know his background a little bit. But I want to get a chance to let you guys introduce yourself, Mike and Miguel, if you can.
All right, so Miguel, I'll start first. My name is Mike Davis. Currently, I work with Abu Dhabi Jiu-Jitsu Pro here in the United States. I am a 20-year promoter. I also work with Ignite Fights, and I've been to about a dozen countries due to the sport of mixed martial arts. Miguel?
Hey, thanks for having me on. I do the Lytes Out podcast right now. It's a history podcast. I like it because I think at this point I'm getting old and history is my thing. I've been doing MMA since '97, and I popped up everywhere I could for about a dozen years. So hopefully, the Lytes Out podcast is where people can see me shine now.
And that's spelled Lytes, Chris Lytle. It's myself, Miguel, and Chris Lytle. So we spelled Lytes. We usually do one long form interview a week and 3 or 4 short segments as well.
Yeah, one thing I really enjoy with you guys is the MMA Conspiracy Hour. I think that's a fun show, and I've been enjoying that one. So let's get started. I'm really excited to get into this topic, and I think a lot of the fans are too. So I want to start off right out with saying, were you expecting this lack of attention for a fight of this massive scale, at least in North America?
All right, so 3 things. One, we'll start hot. The UFC media, all of them receive talking points. Most of them are completely oblivious to the sport outside of the UFC and what they've studied for at that event. And 3, it's a kickboxing bout. However, there are certain crossover matches in the combat sports world that tend to bleed over into the mixed martial arts portion of just the media. This 100% would have qualified for
that. To answer your original question, no, I'm really actually not surprised. I think that this was, when I haven't been to Japan in a decade, but when Todd told me that this was the biggest match ever, basically, I really was like, yeah, right. I really didn't even believe it until, we talked to Ensign Inoue, we talked to a couple of people, and apparently it was. And I knew that it wasn't getting play in the media. That didn't affect me though. But I do think the fact that it's kickboxing has never been a frontline sport in the United States. And the fact that it's lightweights, like really smaller weights, is unappealing to the American audience. And whether you like it or not, that's the case. I had a conversation, Mike and I had a conversation with Montel Griffin, a former world champion boxer guy, beat Roy Jones in his heyday. And we were talking about who's going to be the number 1 pound for pound guy after Mayweather. And, Chocolatito Gonzalez, for those that know, maybe some boxing, Roman Gonzalez out of Nicaragua, earned that spot. He was 45-0 and undefeated and stuff like that. And Montel, as a peer, loved him, said he's very technical, but he said he couldn't take him into account for pound or anything like that because it's just the lower weights. And I think that comes up with the American audience. It's hard to market when the fighters are smaller than the models.
Okay, so Miguel, you're 100% correct. And I had said certain subjects flow into the mixed martial arts like space. So let's just pretend this one doesn't fall into that category, which it should. The drama and controversy surrounding it in regards to, the mafia and Sakakibara involvement and just the kind of just crossing of those two finally coming to a head, that never got picked up either. Like, let's just pretend, all right, Tenshin fight doesn't. That topic absolutely should have.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I'm surprised because of the magnitude of it. I thought for sure they would bring up, look at this, compare, this is going to do a bigger gate than any UFC event has. But part of me, I was thinking in the car, something, I know Mikey brought up a few points, but one I was thinking of is the Japanese MMA scene. They aren't catering to guys who are kind of popular in the MMA media here. They used to do some of that. They would bring guys in, back in the Pride days. They bring some guys from like MMA Weekly, or they aren't bringing in Ariel Helwani, Luke Thomas, any of these people. And I think maybe some of their egos like, well, if they're not going to bring us in to cover it, we're not going to talk about it either. That's something I kind of was thinking about in the car, because they know what's happening. They have to know.
Okay, well, Todd, you had just said the promotion never flies in media. The media gets there on their own accord. Now, whether the promotion purchases some sort of ad, some sort of ads or some, revenue in regards to supporting them that way, that's different. But Ariel Helwani, when the UFC first went to Abu Dhabi for the first time, Ariel Helwani was flown out and put up in a hotel by the UFC. At that point, you being some sort of independent journalist gets put by the wayside. You're no longer that. But for Chris Thomas, he's somebody that's been around the sport for a while. I don't know. I mean, I know he does multi-level marketing. I know he likes to kind of sucker people into that type of stuff. Maybe he was busy selling pills to throw in a gas tank. I don't know.
I would even double down in saying that I wouldn't even say that there was a lack of, media towards this, especially here in the North American side. I would say it was just completely non-existent, because you look online, you can't find anything. There's nobody really that you could figure out, no big MMA media head that people are watching that cover big UFC events. Nobody talked about it. So I would agree with that.
Marcos, the Mafia got that event kicked off of their television provider. Not a peep out of the largest mixed martial arts websites in the world. Now, me, Todd, and Miguel, we do something once a week called the MMA Conspiracy Hour whenever something kind of crazy comes up. So here, let's put a little MMA conspiracy kind of curve ball onto this. Saki Kibara comes into the United States to meet with Floyd Mayweather pre-COVID. Floyd Mayweather invites Dana White over to his house to kind of submarine Saki Kibara, and they actually hit it off and went out to lunch, possibly setting up a business deal in the future. COVID kind of took that by the wayside, but those two got together and there was a mutual respect there. Now, we had all heard that when the Pride sold the UFC, sold itself to the UFC, it was in such shambles in regards to contracts that it was kind of looked at as a bank heist based on the Japanese end of it, and the UFC kind of got in the short end of the spectrum. Who knows what took place at that lunch meeting, but did Dana kill the negative press about Saki Kibara for potential, meeting in the future? I don't know.
Yeah. So where did all this attention draw? Because, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I read something along the lines of 500,000 pay-per-view buys, which is pretty significant. Like that's a lot considering, the lack of attention it got around here. Is all that coming just from Japan? Is it coming from like neighboring countries in Asia? Is it coming from a lot of Asia?
It's Japan. And for Japan, 500,000 is a massive number. Massive, because there is no pay-per-view in Japan. So it was a huge number for them.
How many people were in attendance, Todd?
I think it was just over 60,000.
That's insane. Yeah, that's wild.
I think the same thing, I think the American audience is programmed away from kickboxing. I think it's something that's just really not a frontline sport in consideration. So this is every bit as big as it was in Japan. You know, I was definitely was wrong in missing that point. But I don't think that, you know, we're talking about the media covering it. Why, if it's not going to be shown on any television in the States or anywhere, why would they cover it? Why would they even care? You know, and that's the thing is was there even an attempt to put it on or any, you know, even internet pay-per-views?
Well,
You
Miguel,
know, like the big channels or things like that. And
the
so
internet
it's like,
pay-per-view
care.
came together within the week of the event, within 10 days of the event. You know, this was not going to be a pay-per-view event offered to other parts of the world. And that, I mean, that was kind of like a shoestring deal held last minute. So I don't know, I mean, maybe just their initial setup of it didn't allow it to grow. But when you're MMA media, that's your job. You're supposed to. I mean, Marcos, why didn't you cover it?
To be honest, I've been so like deep into like the world of like UFC, Bellator 1 that I haven't really even taken the time to, honestly.
Yeah.
More so MMA. But I'd say I would agree with what Miguel said. Maybe it's the whole kickboxing thing, because I think if it was maybe a mixed martial arts bout, it would have drawn a little bit more attention for some mixed martial arts fans. At least some, right? Something. But I don't know.
They didn't make any effort for people to see it outside of Japan. You basically had to have like a Japanese credit card to order it. You couldn't order it outside of Japan. So the number, like I said before, Japan is not a pay-per-view market. Free TV is the market. Pay-per-view is minuscule. So for it to get 500,000, that's like 2-3 million, you know, in the US comparative, because no one orders stuff on pay-per-view really. ABIM is pretty small as a pay-per-view provider. So this was kind of an experiment. And now Ryzen's going to be going to their Ryzen Stream Pass thing, which is going to be another thing, kind of like they're not going to do it like UFC Fight Pass, where you pay a monthly subscription, you can just get all these different events. It's going to be strictly pay-per-view. You pay for the event, you watch the event, and that's it. Next one, same thing. Next one, same thing. So it's going to be different, but it'll be interesting to see how that flies.
So Ryzen's actually going over to a pay-per-view format after this?
They're launching a stream pass, just like UFC. Originally, they called it Ryzen Fight Pass. They had to change the name. That shows you how much thought they put into this.
I wonder if this has to do with you know, all the mafia implications that Saki Kibara is kind of been besieged with for a second time. Miguel?
You know, I harken. I'm going to just harp on the same point, but I harken back to the heyday of K1. K1, a big mafia riddle that had, you know, Ernesto Hoost, Andy Hoog. You know, it had a whole worldwide roster of legitimate guys, 80% knockout rate on most of their events and stuff like that. If that didn't get over in the United States, I don't know. You know, I think what Todd said is the point too, that they didn't even plan this event for it. This is a Japanese only event that, you know, with the implications in the country, the good guy versus bad guy image and stuff like that. That's what got people there to care. And they didn't care what the United States thinks. But this would have been the wrong event to market in the States, especially when it turned out to be a 3-round exhibition. It would have actually been damaging to kickboxing, and they don't need that right now.
Yeah. And do you guys think that that could be sort of what Todd just touched on, like maybe sort of a remodeling of how fans ingest the, you know, the content, right? How do you think that do you think that could be a big change, you know, maybe changing the pay-per-view format, things like that? We'll start with Todd. Let's start with Todd on that one, since he sort of talked about it a little bit.
Well, this is something that I've been talking to Zach about, and he was kind of, you know, my friend Zach Scott, you know, he lives in Japan. He trains in Japanese gyms. He's a translator, so he speaks Japanese. And his impression, I mean, from what he's talking to me the other day, is Ryzen really doesn't seem to have any interest in the U.S. market at all right now. In fact, they're really not, even though they're starting to open up a little bit in Japan, they don't really have any interest in bringing in foreign athletes. They're going to, you know, for the time being, keep it mostly Japanese fighters fighting each other for the time being, as to where, you know, when the Pride was in its heyday, even Shudo for that matter, a lot of those cards, they had foreigners on the cards. but Ryzen doesn't seem interested in really making a push for that at the moment.
Can you break down sort of like what it's like to get the tickets for a fight like this? Because that's something that I was watching. I think it was Todd's show, and I think that's really interesting. And it sort of speaks to how big this event was and what people missed out on. Like, what was that whole process like? Like, sort of like, what were the ticket prices, and what was it like to have to get the ticket?
The cheapest ticket was $300. The most expensive was 30,000, which was ringside, obviously. Zach went to the event. Obviously, he got the $300 ticket. He actually got two of them. I think he was able to get them. But like I was saying, when I went to Pride events, and I went to the biggest ones, I bought tickets to those at like Yokohama train station. You just go in there, and there's a spot there where you could buy them. And for this event, you had to win a lottery just to have the opportunity to buy a ticket. So it was another level. You couldn't just go somewhere and buy tickets.
I just am of the opinion that pay-per-view in general is kind of a thing of the past, So I don't know, this sort of is like a personal ticket, or, maybe it's just yes, it's definitely paying for the view, you know what I mean? But I don't know if it needs some type of remarketing or rehashing, because pay-per-view really does reek of the past. I think, the UFC used to model their contracts with the pay-per-view buys, and then there were so many non-pay-per-view events. Pay-per-view is losing its influence. It's lost its influence in boxing, only at the highest levels. But, so I'm not overall sure if this is the thing that's going to save kickboxing, or, make kickboxing become a major, crossover into the media stuff. So, you can take it with a grain of salt, but I'm not sold that pay-per-view is the future. I think it's the past.
Yeah. Do you think there's a page maybe they could take out of, let's say, Pride's book, right? It was a Japanese promotion, but it was able to, sort of reel in some of the American fan base, right? Mike, what do you think about that?
I think the only thing that what drew the Americans to Pride were the freak show fights. It's the very thing that everybody likes to poke fun of and make fun of right now. But the circus big top that Pride was due to the fact that they had Bob Sapp on it, and Crazy Horse Charles Bennett, and even Rampage fell into that category. And those guys are the sweat that Pride was built on. And it also allowed them to highlight the other fighters like Mirko Krokop, Fedor Emelianenko, like when those two met. And, it's like, you're talking about two things. But Pride, if you're going to build like Pride, you're going to have freak show fights and have a good stable of fighters to kind of, lay the foundation of the house. But in terms of pay-per-view models, I think bare knuckle boxing is kind of leading the combat sports in regards to it. Nobody's pirating bare knuckle boxing, because it's $5 a month and it's a reoccurring thing that happens. And I think David Feldman is really putting a foot forward and showing the old guard on how to properly market your event.
Todd, what about you? Because you said that you were there, you were close to it, right? You purchased, Pride tickets at the train station. Do you think there's anything they could take out of Pride's book, or what do you think about that? Was there something that Pride was doing specifically, in your opinion, that they were able to lure those American fans in?
I think at the time, you really just had UFC and Pride as major events. You didn't have things like Bellator and PFL. You had IFL come along. Remember that International Fight League, guys? You remember that? But you had some smaller events, and it was kind of like a tit for tat. They were kind of like, oh, we signed this guy. UFC signed that guy. So I think there was some of that attracted American fans, like who's Pride going to get next, or what are they going to announce next, kind of thing. So you had this promotion, the UFC, that was kind of on the rise, and then you had Pride that had the best fighters in the world for the most part. So there was a little bit of a competition there. Some of the guys wanted to be in the UFC. A lot of these guys like Monty Cox's fighters and Tito Ortiz, Chuck Liddell. You had guys that were well respected, but Pride was where it was at as far as the best fighters in the world. So I think that's what attracted the American fans the most.
Todd, I want to ask you also, because you said, I saw in one of your videos that you said that that the fans almost support these big fights in Japan more than they do like in the United States, right? What do you mean by that? Like, are they like more passionate about it? Are they like buzzing about it like way long, like months prior to the fight?
Well, I think had this one not been pulled from TV, you would have saw more of that. But what I meant by that is when fighters come to Japan, and Mike and Miguel know this, they're treated very well by the fans and usually by the promotions as well on a different level than the UFC per se. Especially like Pride and things like that, the fans are just rabid. Now there are some smaller events where the fans are more hardcore and they may not react the same, especially events like Korakuen Hall, but the Pride events, the fans swarm the fighters. And yeah, it was just yeah, it was awesome. The fans supported it. When you have a big event like this, I said by attendance too, right? They sold out this event. So that's another thing I'm talking about. When they put this event on, the fans showed up. They bought out all the tickets, price be damned. They got them. And so yeah, that's another thing that I thought as far as support goes.
I guess Miguel, we'll start with you. What do you think that, I guess, what took so long about it? What do you think that was the holdup for a fight like that? Do you think, is it a money thing? I don't know. Cause I'm not from, cause this isn't something that I'm into too much in terms of like the kick. It's not that I'm into, I love watching it. Like I was really into the fight, but being so into the MMA space, I kind of wonder about things like this, looking from the outside in,
I think as that there's definitely a cultural way to look at this. And I think that Japan's culture is different than ours. I think at the highest level, we've seen it happen in boxing where, Showtime and HBO will never work together and that sort of stuff. And, eventually people start to work together. The bigger things get when everybody brings something to the table. I think those types of things, that's the way the American system works and what we're used to looking at there. I think, having the power to say no gives you a lot of power. And over there, that could play into it. It's egos and things like that. So I don't know if it could have happened, but I've heard things like it should have happened 5 years ago or things like that along the lines of that. And, at some point, the fighters also start to run out of opponents. They start to run out of options. It's always hard to take a step back and make less money for your next fight, than you made the last time. So once you get to the upper echelon, like these guys are in their sports, they're also looking for the payday. So at that point, it takes like a normal fight. But the Japanese politics, I could see them not overcoming certain things. Like this may never have happened. They probably let matches like this go by. That would be my estimation because it was special for that reason, I think.
Yeah, Mike, what do you think about this? Do you have, in your opinion, is there a specific reason why this fight took so long to come together?
Well, they were, champions on two rival promotions, and they had to have a third promotion to bring both of them together. And I mean, if you think about like Bellator's biggest champion and UFC's biggest champion, and having them fight on an independent circuit, like there's a lot of moving parts there. There's a lot of egos, and there's someone's feelings are going to get hurt, whoever loses, maybe their brand is damaged. So, I mean, that's for this fight to even like take place, to be honest with you, whether it took so long, obviously you're correct because it took several years to take place, but the mere fact that it did happen and that a roundtable discussion was able to come up with, both sides being happy, I mean, that's pretty impressive. I think that's something that only could be done in a country like Japan.
And what was that promotion that they found, like that level playing field on, if you will?
They just formed it. They formed a separate promotion together.
And so that's part of the reason, I guess, why it took so long, right? Was to just find that common ground between the two promotions where they would fight and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's that common ground took several years to get there, and they were both at wit's end. The Japanese are, very strong-willed people, as well as, they have an ego there, and, the public pressure. And with 500,000 pay-per-views, Todd, you're saying it's huge. If this was on like Fuji TV, it probably would have been about 3 or 4 times that in regards to, eyes being on it.
And
Yeah,
food.
probably more than that. The incident
Oh,
made a
no
reference
doubt, no
to,
doubt.
grandmothers watching it, grandmas at home were interested in seeing the fight. So, yeah, I think really fast, I think what's missing is Japanese athletes that we had 20 years ago. Even, in Pancrase, they had guys that were able to go to UFC. In Pride, they had Sakuraba, who was the superstar there. And again, you're talking about guys that if you're going to compete and bring in world level opponents, basically have to be heavyweights, have to be big guys. And that is what's absent in the Japanese market. They haven't built a new guy. It's not like they're, those schools didn't seem to continue and breed those stars. And I think that's what's going to take to bring them back into that, is somebody who catches a natural interest over there, like a Sakuraba, but turns out to be able to compete on the world level. In MMA, to Tenshin, crossover to MMA, too small, he wouldn't be a world level star.
Let's keep going here. So what I want to ask is, in hindsight, I want to ask both of you guys, do you think that this fight lived up to the hype? Was it more than what you expected? Was it less? Obviously not around here in the United States, but in that area in Japan at the very core, do you think that it lived up? Because it seems like it was a mega super fight. Todd?
I want to say yes and no. Had the event been on Fuji, where you had, over 80% of the households in Japan watching it, like Kid Yamamoto versus Masato, then it would have lived up to the hype. Now, as far as the event, don't get me wrong, the Tokyo Dome was packed, it was big, but had it been on Fuji TV, it would have been much bigger in terms, like, for example, Zach was telling me you really didn't see a lot of posters around or stuff on the trains or anything like that, even though the event was sold out. You weren't really seeing that push because of the scandal beforehand. Because of that, it wasn't as big as it should have been, in my opinion, but it was still huge. But it would have been much bigger had it been on Fuji TV, on national TV. It would have been much bigger. Everyone would have watched it. People who have no interest in fighting, just like Kid versus Masato. All kinds of people would have been watching that had no interest in fighting. And that's when it would have been as big as it should have been.
What exactly is that? Like, is that because you said that it was something that it would have been a lot better had it been on Fuji TV, right? There would have been more viewership, perhaps. Before I get to you, Miguel, what exactly is Fuji TV for the people that don't know? Is it like a big streaming platform for sports in Asia, or?
Fuji TV is kind of like where, how we have ABC, NBC, CBS.
Yeah.
Japan has like 3 channels also, and Fuji TV is one of them. And so it's basically every household in Japan has it. National TV is much bigger than pay-per-view in Japan. Streaming isn't even a thing. People turn on their TV and you have your channels. You know what I mean? Buying extra channels and having a cable package and all, that's not common in Japan.
And Miguel, what do you think? Getting back to that, did the fight live up to you looking back in hindsight?
Like I said, and you asked that, let's just be thankful they didn't present that to the American audience, because it was, short. It really wasn't explosive as a fight and stuff like that. So, but for Japan, I think it had a lot of drama. And I think, the possibility of a rematch could potentially be there. I think, I just don't know. Again, it's kickboxing, so it's the kind of thing that's not my wheelhouse and stuff. But this aspect, this fight had the good guy versus bad guy kind of like images between the guys and things like that. And if it could be recycled, they probably will a few years down the line. The guys are young enough; they could probably do it. But the sequel usually makes less money. So I think we've seen the heyday of the fight. I think it is what it is. It would be best served as a standalone, even for the Japanese audience, I think.
Well, I think it could be recycled, but not as the same fight. What's going to happen is Tenshin is going to boxing now. He's going to start a boxing career. They already have Inoue, who's one of the best fighters in the world in Japan. And so I think they could have kind of like Tenshin fighting on his undercards. That would already be huge. A lot of people would come just to see that, just to see them both fight on the same card. Not necessarily have to fight each other, but maybe someday that could happen. And that would be a massive fight. Obviously, they're close the same weight. So I think Inoue is 125 and Tenshin's right around that, 135 or something. So they could concede, but Inoue is super experienced. He's one of the best boxers in the world. I don't know if that would ever take place, but Tenshin coming up as a boxer, that's something a lot of people would come to see just because he's on the card with Inoue.
Takeru retired as well after the fight, didn't he? So, I mean, or is it that he just retired from kickboxing?
He says he wants to go to MMA. I've talked about this a little bit on our show. This is something that Pride used to do, which I just talked about. The punch, like the big punch that they would land in between events was almost as fun to watch as the event itself. What are they going to do next? If they could get, you just lost Tenshin, who's going to boxing. That's just all there is to it. If they could get Takeru away from K1 somehow, Ryzen, that would be the punch, like the Pride used to do. Like when they signed Murillo Bustamante away from the UFC, Murillo was champion at the time. Pride used to do some crazy stuff as far as signings went. Or they bring in some guy who had a huge reputation. Somehow the UFC didn't get him. Pride did. That's something I think would, because you got to capitalize on this. You just had this big event. If you don't capitalize on something, if you don't hit some sort of home run within the months after, that's not good. You need another, well, you have all these eyes on, you need some kind of,
I think I'll start with Miguel on this one. What do you think? Do you think is there ever a fight that came close to you for this fight in like the history of Japan? Was there ever a fight that even approximated this one? Because this is known as the greatest fight of the century. People have deemed it that. What to you comes close to that one? If not better, if not better.
The heyday of the MMA and Pride shows, and I don't even know, I think it may have had a different name, but the 2004 New Year's Day events in Japan, I believe that was Fedor Nogueira, that level of main event, Enson Inoue, I'm going to look them up so that I don't fumble around too much in front of you guys here. But while I do that event at the same time was going on in New Year's, was going head to head with K1 presenting what Todd called the previous biggest fight, which was Kid Yamamoto and Masato. So if you look at like topping that day, I don't think that there was, as I understand New Year's in Japan, again, these TV stations, the three terrestrial channels, as they call them, dominate. And one of them has like a variety show everyone watches where everybody's like doing, whatever, type of variety, music presentations or whatever. And then there's the fighting shows. And they split the audience basically. And when certain fights happen, the fight pulls away, the audience there. And you're talking about the entire country, a population of 150 million people. So not to correct Mike, but when he goes, 3-4 times the 500,000, it's probably more along the lines of 30 to 40 times that amount would have seen the fight. So that part, I don't think that they have a hard time matching. But for pure pomp and spectacle, and the card, the entire card, like who else fought on this Tenshin card? Like that's for the sheer spectacle. New Year's 2004.
What about you, Todd?
Oh, for me, it was Yoyogi Stadium, 2002. Japan, when I got there, the World Cup was in Japan. The night I landed, they beat Russia. First game they've ever won in the World Cup. And wow. Japan, the promoters kind of capitalized on that. They called, they had this event at Yoyogi Stadium. I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, I'll send you some footage of it. But it was at Yoyogi National Stadium. So there was like 90,000, I think, 91,000 people. And that's where Bob Sapp fought Nogueira. Yeah, Crocout fought Sagarapa. They had some, Don Fry fought Jerome Banner. They kind of had a K1 versus Pride sort of thing going, but it was an outdoor show. They called it kind of their fighting World Cup. So it was, they had all that spirit going on at the time. It was like what just happened. They had this massive event. People turned out for it. And that's something that only the Japanese can do. I don't think the US can do it right now. But when the Japanese wants to do it, and not just that, you watched the match, you saw all the spectacle of it, you saw all the video and everything. It was next level compared to what the UFC does.
It was, yeah,
just totally another level. And
was
that's
a
something that
spectacle.
Japan can do that other people can't do.
For the data people out there, so December 2004, K1 Premium Dynamite. Obviously, that card was, topped by the aforementioned match between I'm missing the Japanese guys' names.
Are you talking about Masato and Kid?
Yeah, was that Masato?
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
Masato Kid Yamamoto.
Obviously, yeah, that was huge. Don't get me wrong.
And
It
I
was.
apologize.
That was big, yeah.
So that Masato Kid Yamamoto, that was the fight, the headlining the K1 event. That's the showstopper that the entire country watched. That card also had Akibono versus Hoist Gracie.
Yeah.
So like you're talking about, they threw everything they could at that card. Now, running at the same time, you had Dan Henderson versus Yuki Kondo, Mirko Kokop versus Kevin Randall in the rematch, Rulon Gardner versus Yoshida. There's one of your Japanese stars, and Nogueira and Fedor, at the Pride Shockwave event. So look at the magnitude of those two events in that day, and what, as MMA fans, we have to look back at. And I don't, to me, I think that it doesn't match up.
Well, the other thing, like Fuji TV, before this whole scandal happened, they were planning like a 4-hour pre-show and just showing this fight. You know what I'm saying? A 4-hour pre-show for just this fight on national TV with all kinds of interviews, backstage, the lead up to which they did some of that with Kid and Masato, because I watched that fight. They had them come off the bus, they had them in the locker rooms, they were filming all that stuff the whole time. People were talking about it, on TV. So they were going to do that. They were going to have like a 4-hour special and then air this fight. So that's what I'm saying, when it couldn't be as big as it could have been, where everyone was watching it, and maybe it would have catapulted some of the Japanese scene again, because it's not where it was before. It's just not. A lot of people don't think it'll ever get there again. That's kind of what I'm talking about when I say, is it as big as it could have been?
Yeah. So speaking of big fights, right? Is it too early to maybe think of what could be next in terms of mega fights in Japan? Is there one that comes to any of your guys' minds in terms of what could even match that? I mean, it doesn't have to match it, but is there something that could even come close to making such a mega fight like that? Because I think that the match 2022 sold like about, or did over like 25 million in revenue or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, which is incredible. Is there anything like that that could be close soon? Todd?
Not without those two guys involved. I mean, I don't think MMA wise they have anyone that can, generate that right now. But those two guys were the guys. Like I said, people have been waiting 10 years for the fight. They were the same weight. Takeru hadn't lost a match in about 10 years. Tenshin had never lost a fight in kickboxing. So it was kind of like a volcano that people have been waiting to erupt for a long time. That everyone saw it was there, but they couldn't get it to explode. And MMA wise, they don't have that. Now they had some guys on the show, especially Yaman, is what he's called, Yaman. He kind of, I think, came out of this show kind of, I would say, with the biggest momentum of the guys on the undercard. But could he be in a fight of that magnitude anytime soon? No. And I don't think they have anyone MMA wise who could do it either. You know, they got Mayweather coming up. He's going to fight Asakura, Mikuro Asakura.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have the same interest at all as Tenshin's fight with Takeru. It's going to be hard. I mean, if Japan could build up their MMA again, maybe they could generate some of that just by creating somebody. But that's what it'll take.
Now you're saying MMA specifically because that's where you think the money is, right? The money is clearly not in kickboxing. I mean, it's obvious.
Well, they could generate someone in kickboxing too. Don't get me wrong. It could be either one. But those two guys were just head and shoulders above everybody. So they have to generate a couple of guys again, you know, and that's where the challenge is.
You know, Todd mentioned a name that is interesting, and though he's not a heavyweight, he is a guy who's established himself on the world level as a guy who can compete with anybody, and that's Takuya Inoue, the world champions super bantamweight boxer. Yeah. Now, if him and Tenshin's never going to get to that level. If he wants to have his head removed for him, he can fight him. They call the kid the monster. I mentioned Chocolatito Gonzalez way at the beginning of this. Inoue coming up was aimed at beating Gonzalez because Gonzalez had made a career for himself fighting in Japan. He actually started out at super flyweight and skipped a weight because he just, I guess, was cutting too much weight and missed Chocolatito Gonzalez. But you're talking about an elite of the elite, a guy who's already in the pound for pound top 5 probably in the world right now. So that match to me, you know, maybe they can create something there because they've got a world level athlete, but you know, putting Inoue against real world level competition in Japan might be better, and then have the tension. I don't know how that would work because Inoue is a truly elite boxer. To put a guy who's crossing over to boxing after a career in something else in there is to me a joke athletically. So, you know, but that sometimes it doesn't eliminate the big fight. You know what I mean? Akibono Grace, did I mention that before?
Yeah, I mean, Teddy Atlas, I saw him say that he thinks Inoue is the best fighter currently. So Teddy Atlas is really high on Inoue.
That's a good opinion right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, let's see what the future holds, right? And I think that's a good wrapping point, you know, in terms of talking about all this stuff, you know, the lack of attention, all that stuff. So it was good to bring you guys in to get some insight because, you know, a lot of people that watch at least this channel are more so into MMA and not so into that event. And I hope it brings some awareness towards the event and people actually go check out the fight. So I want to thank you guys for joining the show. But before you leave, where could the people find you guys? You know, all the shows, all that good stuff.
We're at the Lytes Out podcast, and Lytes Out Clips on YouTube is probably the best place. You can look up the Lytes Out podcast on Spotify, Rumble, iTunes, and all where, you know, you can download podcasts. And we do long form interviews with fighters, you know, with a historical spin. Chris Lytle, Mike Davis, the MMA detective, and myself are the team. Todd helps us out with the MMA Conspiracy Hour. Todd's got his own thing going. I'm going to let him go.
Yeah, and it's Lytes because Chris Lytle, you know, that's how he spells his last name. And they do a lot of historical stuff. So if you look at guys from the old school, these guys have more than anybody. And you know, the MMA Conspiracy Hour is kind of a spin off of that, which is something that me and Miguel and Mike do, which I really enjoy doing. And they have that on. So they have the Lytes Out podcast YouTube channel, and then Lytes Out Clips is what that's called. And that's where they tend to keep those. And then I have the show Todd Atkins Show that I do primarily on Instagram, you know, and then I'll put it on some of the other platforms, just clips of it and stuff like that. But that's mostly where I do mine. So it's the _Todd_Atkins_show. And that's where I do it.
All right, guys. Thanks again for joining the show and take care.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.